So, there is this transition of different labels that we've gone through in history. Thoughts?
All right, so
History buff.
So let me throw some history on you. Kind of where we start seeing the transition, like we didn't see it like post-slavery. Where we really saw it was at the kind of the creation of the kind of the winning of the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And what you need to know is that racial labels, just like everything else, is a man-made construction that still has a lot of power. People like to say it's just man-made, it's nothing. That's not true. It's also a legal term. And that's what's important. Whiteness is a legal term. Blackness is a legal term. The way that laws in our nation and everything works is this brick building structure of once something's established, what can we do with it?
Yep.
So after the civil rights movement, after, black people were no longer second-class citizen.
Wait, what?
Yeah, legally.
Yeah,
We're no longer legally a second-class citizen. We had what was called the Southern Strategy that showed up. And white Southern men especially abandoned the Democratic Party that had signed white Southern men abandoned the Democratic Party that had signed in the Civil Rights Act. They abandoned it in droves.
Yeah.
So this is where we start seeing the transition, where we're no longer niggers legally as of that day. Before that day, you could run for political office, you call us Negroes, niggers, whatever you wanted. That was 100% fine. After that, we started seeing colored show up, and we started seeing a lot more nuanced language, and not only language but law. That's when you start seeing not only law but monuments being erected to Robert E. Lee and all those sorts of things. That's when white history and white oppression became something that was no longer Donald Trump, was much more Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
And for 50 years, we've seen this transition. And while what's always amused me is that the NAACP, founded right when all of that was happening, they weren't just like, we are the Negroes Association. They had already settled on colored people. And while colored people for them was a very narrow window of black people, because during that time, Latino, like Mexicans, were considered Caucasian.
Yeah.
Because of the laws that had happened when Texas had been traded from Mexico to us. Like, all the Mexicans just became white people. And you find these really cool case laws of them regaining their Latinhood, regaining the right to be their own people. There were, like in Texas, there was this huge, 25 years that not a single person with a Spanish surname served on a jury. And everybody was like, but look, they're white, it doesn't matter. We can just have these all white, it's fine. But it was because they weren't considered an other people, and because that amendment only protected a blackness and a whiteness. It took us another 15 years to start understanding the nuance of the entire situation. And then it came down to culturally, what does each culture call themselves? Like, when did black people decide they didn't want to be colored people, but we were black? That came in with the Black Panthers and that reclamation of blackness.
And James Brown, don't forget.
And James Brown, yeah, when it was that black is beautiful, when when we started to want that blackness, and all of the things that all the retaliation that happened from all of that.
Yeah.
But you see it in a lot of other people as well, when they try to reclaim their otherness. The white cloak is so quick to strike down on them and try to take that away from them.
So I have a question, and it goes within this topic. And I want to learn this also, because I never really understood the difference. Well, I guess I do understand the difference, but I want to know and understand what it means from someone when, a lot of people get offended being called African American.
Oh God, do not call me that.
Okay.
Sorry, do not call me that.
Okay, so now that that's been established, why do you feel that way?
Okay, just because I know I have an African ancestry, because I don't know much about that, I don't think it's fair to call me African American. I think it's just a politically correct term to use to, oh, I don't want her to feel bad. No, here's the thing. When you say African American, you're automatically people think if you're brown or if you look black, you're automatically African American, and you are removing Caribbean Americans, you're removing Jamaican Americans from that dialogue. And a lot of times when that happens, it's like it just makes a lot of things convoluted. I'd rather call myself black with African ancestry rather than African American, because I feel like that to me is more, it makes more sense. I know white South Africans who come up here and they should technically be African American, but because they look white, oh, you're just white.
But it's more nuanced than that, because African Americanness is its own anthropological subsection.
It is.
And it's why we have gone away from calling all brown people African Americans to the African diaspora.
Yeah,
because in that you get Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Brazilian, you get straight up Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, Central Africa. But African Americans are the people without a home.
There you go. You know, one thing I want to make a point of is that I know with my history and with I know my great grandmothers on both sides were born slaves. That this group of people are the only group of people in America that were property. We never had a chance to define ourselves. We've never had a chance to define what does it really mean to be black? What does it mean to be a Negro? What does it mean to be African American? Because every time we try to define ourselves, whether it be about our hair, how we do our hairstyles, clothes we wear, our dialect, how we speak, the colloquialisms, how we walk, how we talk, it all of a sudden goes into pop culture magically, and now it's just, oh, this is what we do as Americans. Which that's cute but like for face value that's real cute, but then when you really look at it, it's like, damn, why can't this group have something that identifies them as a subgroup? I don't know why. I don't know why, especially like when it comes down to music, when it comes down to inventions that we created, it's always like, oh, that's cute, it's American. Why can't you give credit where credit is due? And I know I'm going a little bit off topic, but just to bring it home, it's a shame. It's really a shame that we in 2017 going on 2018, we're still trying to define what it means to be black in America. And every time I feel like we go on the cusp of, oh, this makes sense to us. And anytime I feel like we're on that brink of claiming something, whether it be cornrows, whether it be rapping or whatever, dreads, it's like when a celebrity takes it and they sure don't look like me, and they rocking some cornrows and they call them
brand new,
some brand new,
something.
And like
head
right, or like if I see a girl rocking Bantu knots and she sure don't look like me and she got straight blonde hair and they call them twisted mini buns, I'm offended. Because once again, that is something, I know that sounds, it's very minute.
No,
that's very small, but it's still something that was created in our culture, and yet again, it's something that was taken and made it into pop culture. Oh, this is just American. Why are you so mad?
I will say, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was to say, sometimes imitation is the highest form of flattery.
Oh, that's cute.
No,
That's real cute.
I just want to quickly, because we're right on this subject here, and I just want to, because I want to make sure that we also address this.
I want to talk about this.
Please.
So because I'm not African American or I'm not black and anything, I do not understand that plight. But what I do understand is not having a name. I'm Caucasian. according to the government.
But they do have a, don't
But-
they do, like on applications, have that other
Not
than white?
not until 2 years ago.
Not
Okay.
until 2 years.
Not until 2 years ago. So before that, I was always marking other.
Yeah,
Other.
that's what I
Well, it
do.
We
used to
don't
be
have an
Asian
identity.
and
A
Hispanic
lot,
and nothing else.
Yeah.
Indian.
Yep.
Indian. I'm sorry, Indian is not Asian.
Wait, India,
And that's what I'm talking about. No, no.
Okay.
They are not Asian.
We did say that.
but they're part of Asia.
They are part of Asia, but they are not Asian.
not Asian.
Okay,
They are
'cause in
not.
my
not typically
culture,
considered Asian
in my
They,
culture,
by other
they do not
Asians.
consider themselves
that's,
Asian.
yeah, and that's understandable.
That's
but,
that's
like,
an internal debate in
from-
India right
Yeah.
now because
Yeah,
there's a
that's
big
tough.
movement of Indian, especially professionals, that are like, we are Asian, we demand representation.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Like
Yeah.
that is an internal
The
debate. I can't
internal
not
thing.
take.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I'm saying,
'Cause
but
in the
here,
UK,
here
we
when
call
we
them
when we say,
Asians.
but I'm saying, but when here and we say, if I were to say Asian American, what do you think of?
I think
yeah.
it
Yeah.
once again it all depends on your upbringing because I think of it people who were born in India or people who were born in other outside of India in that in the Asian continent
So Russian.
because that's what we consider.
Well, I'm just saying.
But I mean,
it's one of those
it's
things
based on
where
upbringing, honestly.
It's, and I
really
look at
is.
that. It's based on upbringing too. But I'm like, there are a lot of, I say there are a lot of races that we have out here that, honestly, there's just no representation at all for them.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And that's what's
we
like
have
in
we
society.
have we have
Yep.
lumped together Pacific Islander, and I'm like, oh my word, how many different races are involved in that?
Well, I mean,
Oh yes. Please.
oh, sorry.
But I'm like,
Yes,
No, sorry.
she hasn't said anything.
I don't understand. Like I said, while I strive very hard to understand, and I got to see something today that was very beautiful. I kind of talked to you about that earlier, but but I was like, it was lovely.
And we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, later. But it was. I get to look at this, and I've always wanted to ask too. I'm like going, would an African American person, or I should say, would a black person, if I were to refer to
The
you as
person
just
of
black,
color.
or as rather than African American. I was like, and I mean, I know from somebody who is not black that I sometimes go, are they going to be offended if I call them African American? Are they going to be offended if I call them black?
Well, that's the whole
Are they,
point
you know,
of
and
this
and that's what I'm saying.
topic,
That's
too.
what I'm saying. So I just was
What
gonna,
do
I
you
want to
call-
pose to
so-
you guys who have that background.
It's kind of like asking somebody what their pronouns is. It's kind
Yeah,
of
I know,
To
it's
be
hard.
progressive because
That's real.
because if you walk up to my Ethiopian friend and you say, hey, what's it like being African American? They might fight you on there. Because there's so many different because of the situation of African Americans, there is so many random disconnects, and we have so many things to deal with in our own culture. I was talking to my coworker who's Trinidadian, and she was talking about a time where she was talking about dating an African man, and her friends, her black African American friends, were just like, "Why would you date an African?" Because we have that disconnect to get over as well. And that is why we've really moved. And we're trying to move to the African diaspora or the African American diaspora, if you want to say the whole thing, because it includes all of us at a root. And from there, you can really get to, it's kind of like the black version of we're all people.
Well, I was like, I've actually had this come across where talking to friends, they just would flat out say, "I'm just American. I am not African American." He goes, "I was born here. I'm American."
Well, the funny thing
And
with
it's
that
just like,
too
oh,
Yep.
I'm sorry.
is that other cultures feel the same way.
Yeah.
I know in growing up with my parents, they always made it apparent for us to not hang out with African American kids because they were seen as the children that disrespected their parents. And we actually had a nickname for them called Akata, which kind of along the lines meant that they were the nasty children. They were the ones that did drugs, or they were the ones that, just the regular stereotypes, So it wasn't only on this side of it, it was on, at least culturally, it was on that, at least from Nigeria side of it also.
Yeah, we have it over there too.
The 70s and 80s marketing just scheme for what African Americans were to justify their treatment to the world. Because if you look at it, like you watch a great movie, like a 1980s movie, and you're like, oh, black people aren't really like that. But if that is your only exposure, and this comes from, so I was raised by my all-white family, and my great-grandmother, I was the first African American she'd ever spoken to. And so when I was like 12, she brought me aside and just had a bunch of questions for me. Because it is impossible when you've only grown up with black people in minstrel shows, not actual black people, black-faced people, that's the only place you've ever seen them. It is impossible to understand that the black person in front of you that you have known their entire life in an all-white active Klan town is culturally identical to you. For they are an other, as you have been told. So it's like when I go to Portugal, my son is Portuguese. When I go to Portugal, I'm considered Moroccan until I speak, and then there's always a moment of like, well, what kind of black are you? And being an African American, a lot of them, the only exposure to African Americans that they've ever known has the 1970s and 80s Hollywood.
Exploitation films.
Yep.
And when you're walking through that kind of a minefield out into everything, and it's going to be a very similar thing to what we have coming for Arab Americans and everybody else, like when in 10 years, when you have a kid who their only exposure was that 9/11 movie they watched, all of a sudden it's like, well, hi. And we're only now getting to the point where other information can travel quickly. And we talked about this earlier, like now is the time that information can beat itself. But people that I'm talking to in the middle of Portugal and stuff like that, they have this VHS player or a DVD, and that's as far as that exposure is ever going to get. They're never watching the news and seeing, like, they know that black people are in sports, and they know that black people are portrayed this way in movies, so that's how it must be somehow. Like, that's the weird balance that we go through, because we're 50 years away from truly getting information to spread evenly.
As somebody who went through the term spick growing up, and being called Blackie, and people didn't really know where to place me because I lived in a white neighborhood, and there were very few urban black people going to my school, and even then they were busted from the city, so literally they were urban. But I found the whole terminology, the semantics of Asian American and African American. Oh God, I'm using finger quotes.
Busted. We got you. Not Trump's America.
I found that weird because, here you have, Asian American. You're lumping in all of those countries into one term. You're lumping in a continent of a bunch of other countries into one term. And then people are still going around saying like Irish American, or British American, or Russian American, or Swedish American, or Australian American, or whatever else.
Or we talked
like
about
one country.
Or the term Caucasian.
Right. Right.
From the great continent of Caucasia.
And you mentioned the original guy who came up with the 5 races or whatever, and now
it's Friedrich. I forgot his last name.
something. Google it, whatever.
We're not saying names.
But in recent history, science has basically told us there's no such thing as race. I mean, our gene pool is this big.
Yeah.
Like, we're all related, literally. And there are 8 billion of us on the planet. So, yeah, lumping and semantics, and it's weird. And, I mean, yeah, that's all I have to go on that. That's really all I have to say on that. But, I mean, going into, but then the middle part of the question was, going from the colored terminology to minorities. Well, that's basically white government in this country saying, you're all brown and I don't know what to do with that. So you're a minority because you're not in power. You're a minority because you're not being represented. We're okay with you not being represented, and we're the ones making the laws.
I've always had a problem with that term, minority.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, there's more of me than there are of you.
Yes!
Our society is 51% women, and we're still lumped in with minority.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have a problem with that. I'm like, I'm like, what? I'm the minority? So,
It's truly is a legal term. Like all of these things are legal terms. And it comes down to trade agreements. It comes down to like where the money's gonna move. Who do we have to talk to? Who's the big player? Like right now, we go over and we talk to China. And we're like, we've made an agreement with Asia. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I'm pretty sure nobody was talking. Hey, Vietnam, what's up? Like most of these people were ignored. Like, but we have made an agreement with Asia. It really is all legal terminology. It's not about what makes sense. It's not about how you feel because the law doesn't care about feelings. It's about structure and power.
Yes.
That is all it is. And where these lines are drawn. And we saw clearly, back to nerd history here, like World War II cutting up the world defined how power would be handed down for way beyond our time. Like we like to think about how these things happened so long ago. Your great grandma was born into slavery. I'm telling you right now, World War II was yesterday. Politically and legally and geologically, we do not get to see the next step of this. It happened too soon. We get to fight our entire lives. You're welcome. Merry Christmas. That's my only gift to you is strife. But that's what it is. That's where minority comes from.
And that's,
How do you feel about that? Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just saying it's one of those things that that's one of those things that when people call me a minority. It actually, to me, is I find that more offensive than if somebody were to call me an Arab or a kike or anything like that. You know, I'm like, I won't use the other words, but you know.
No, we should use other words. What other words?
Well, I mean, because the people, some of us were called, niggers. They were actually some of us. They lumped us up as just Jews or as just sand niggers. That's been a recent one. Towelheads has been another one.
Hajis
Has been another one.
Military specific.
Jihadists.
And jihadists, and then flat out just calling us terrorists. And I'm like, I have never had a bomb strapped to me.
That's what kills me. All of
I'm
you.
like, I have never had a bomb strapped to me. Okay, maybe as a cosplay, but it wasn't a real one.
It was good. It was really good.
But no, I'm just like, that is. And I get really disturbed, especially every time, like, when, this sounds bad, it's been, what, 12, 13 years? 9/11?
Yeah.
And, like, that just came up, and I'm like, that day comes around, and I always get kind of...
It's been 16 years, exactly.
I look around, I look around, I have to look around because I'm thinking, oh, God, okay. Oh, yeah, they just shot a boy.
Yeah.
It's been how long? And he wasn't even Middle Eastern. Okay, great.
16 years, and it's still in everyone's hearts.
You know what I truly feel the worst for in the world? The Sikhs.
Like,
Sikhs, my guys, like they are the most possibly innocent people
like
in
ever.
Everything.
Yeah.
But they because of the head wrap, the turban always being so present and so prevalent, like they have no affiliation whatsoever.
And I don't understand that because if you look at anybody from the Middle East, people from Saudi, Iraq, people who are Persian, people from Lebanon, Syria, none of them look Sikh.
Yeah. No. None of them look like Jake Gyllenhaal either.
And no.
Woo! And we're back to the pop culture.
Okay.
Fired.
Yeah. Shall we talk about Prince of Persia?
Nope, not yet.
Not that one?
We'll get into next topic.
But, yeah.
Oh my God, don't die.
No,
Look to the light, look to the
Too much
light.
to bear, boo. It's too much to bear.
So hard.
It's one of those things where I just gotta, and I'm like, I don't understand and I'm like, and I, as I said this, we all look alike.
Yeah.
If we're not white, we all look alike.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like,
She
and
would think
I
there'd
get
be
to
more
sit
reason
next
for
to her and
peace,
go,
but no.
we look alike.
Yeah.
Please.
Double rainbow!
How weird is it? Like, I mean, I don't think I know anybody from India, but they make up a third of the world's population and are still considered a minority in many countries. And they're like, do you want your computer fixed? Or did you want that
Don't
medical
stereotype,
procedure? Do you want a qualified surgeon? Did you,
Yeah.
you know, come on.
Yeah, because a lot.
It's
yeah, they
true
are.
though. Right.
Yeah. And then moving from minority to people of color, I mean, that was just a rebranding. Like nothing, and it's something like working where I do right now in the African American African community. There's so many individual groups taking true identity politics and being like, people of color, done with that. Like, we'll take people of color when you're actually like raising the water for all of us, but right now we're really digging into identifying ourselves, like, and what that means.
So do
It's like
people
both.
see that as an okay term?
People of
People
color.
of color, because we've
I actually
been
don't.
I think ever since like a couple years ago, that's been like the norm.
It has, but I'm like, I
term.
kind of have a problem with it too.
Why?
Just for instance, going and auditioning, you don't look Middle Eastern enough.
I don't think people of color means anything.
But I don't.
No.
Yeah, that's like. But what does it? And that's what I was to say. What does it mean? Because I'm definitely not colored.
Well, for me, it means someone who could tan really well. Honestly,
I can.
like,
I can't. Oh, I can tan well.
naturally, it means those people that don't put toner on their
Well,
face.
wait, here's the question. So what if I didn't tan very well?
Then,
But does that make me any less of a person of color?
maybe.
Does?
No.
No. Well, no. I'm saying it's why I have a problem
No,
with
I
saying
just-
person of color.
Yeah, but
And because it's like, I kind of feel, sometimes I kind of feel when it's like, they go, oh, like when you were asking me earlier, like, oh, come to this person of color. And first time we did it, and I was like, I was like, oh, I don't know about this. I'm like, are you sure? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, because I don't look like I'm a person of color.
yeah, but you are.
But it's like, and they were like, well, that's great, that's wonderful. And I'm like, okay, but I'm like, but I don't really identify a lot of times as a person of color.
Yeah.
Because when I look in the mirror, I don't see that.
But then get out of here.
Because,
for real.
Because, no, I just see
No
me.
kidding.
I can
Yeah.
identify
And I
with that,
don't- yeah.
absolutely. I was raised white. My white family didn't know anything about my Puerto Rican culture or heritage or whatever, like aside from my biological mom. When I look in the mirror, it took so long for me to realize why the kids at school ostracize me. But these days, I'm like,
We got you, girl. Get it out there.
I don't want to make her cry, or geez.
Round of tears. Round of tears. Ashley, get it going. You have to cry first.
Wait, why are you looking to the women to cry?
No, I gotta watch a sad movie. Give me like Ditto crying in Pokemon.
But I will say, like, I will say that the term POC, I use it definitely when I speak with my white friends and family.
Yeah.
I think for many people, they innocently regard it as the same thing that Indigenous American people go through. A lot of them will say, please call me by my tribe.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what your tribe is.
Exactly.
And when I see a group of you together, am I going to ask individually which tribe you're from? When I say I'm on a POC panel, I'm not expecting a white person to say, oh, well, where is each person from? What's their nationality? What do they identify as? So I think in that way the term can be innocent.
That's where I'm coming from with it.
Until there is a culture that rises up and says, please identify us this way.
And I just like that snapped something kind of into my brain as it is an incredible wall against white people. Like POC, like when we're all hanging out together, and talking with each other, we'll be whatever we're gonna be.
We'll say whatever
Yeah, we'll be whatever we're gonna be. I'm three-quarter zebra. You'll respect my zebrahood, like, or whatever. But when we say I'm on a POC panel, we are informing white people what they're going to walk into.
Yes.
Yes.
We are, and while it is a term of unity, it is also kind of, it isn't our strongest term. It's why it's not people of color lives matter.
Sure,
Like it's
sure.
and things like that. Like but but Black Lives Matter is a POC movement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, in it, yeah.
And they
So
do.
it,
Sorry, I'm like-
yeah.
Sorry.
Not all cognacs are brandies, but definitely all brandies.
And that's-
all
and
cognacs are brandies, but not all brandies are cognacs.
Yeah, and that's
I
where
hate that whole
I'm coming
all lives matter shit.
from
I'm like,
with
no,
that.
no,
Like,
no.
yeah,
No, no, no.
we'll
We're not
talk
gonna- we'll
about
talk about
that.
it later.
But that's where I'm coming from with that. Like, when I specifically asked each and every single one of you guys, I knew that all of you had different experiences, and you were all coming to the table with that kind of information on why it is that you want to be, referenced as this, and why you want to be referenced as this, is so that we all can learn, so that we know. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everybody else knows. You know.
Being a super predator.
Thanks,
Hillary!
Says the man in the leotard.
This is a morph suit! It's sweaty as hell!
I'm about 5 pounds right now. No, but I did want to approach on the minorities bit and just being from a different culture and everything, because I grew up English. I grew up I learned about being African American and Black here. I learned about racism here, which it's hard because, a lot of people want to automatically assume that I've known about this stuff all my life, and I haven't.
Yeah.
Like the first time anyone has ever called me the N-word was literally after the elections last year. Wow. So, that was my experience with that. Because
How did
the
I would have said it earlier?
Real quick, Abby. Real quick. If you
the
could, just real quick. How did that make you feel?
Well, usually when the way I learned to deal with things is that if we had a beef with someone, say like at a football match, there are bricks and bats that are involved usually, and
British
tempers.
style?
Yes,
No,
British style, exactly.
Oh.
Seeing as there were more than one person there, I decided to leave shortly thereafter and cower in my home because that made me, besides the fact that I don't use that word, I don't say that word does not come from my lips, even in a song. I don't feel a need to use that word. And so hearing it come from somebody else, it broke my heart. It broke my heart that word even still exists to this day.
And from what I'm hearing, though, it immediately instilled fear. And something you
Oh
hadn't
no,
even
not
known?
fear.
Well, no, because you said you
there was
cowered.
definitely anger.
Well, your anger.
Yeah,
but I'm
there
saying,
was-
but you left.
Yes.
You left and you went home.
Yeah.
So, even though you may not have even known it, you were afraid.
Yeah. There was.
And I'm like, and that's not even a word that you've really even heard before, but even been called before. And so, but instantaneously, a word that you had never heard, like we heard used, but may have been called before,
Yeah.
immediately instilled fear into you. And I'm like, going, that just tells you how powerful that word is.
Yeah.
And what it means. And I'm like, that was like, I had to bring that because because I'm like, it's just interesting watching people who hear it the first time and have been called first time, and you're just like,
Yeah. And it wasn't that I hadn't heard it before, because I had.
yeah,
It was just being called.
called. That's what I'm saying.
For
It's
the
being
first
called.
time. Yeah.
So it was just like, yeah, I'm like,
But no, it was, I think, when you have adrenaline going and you don't really think about it at the time, there was definitely anger that the word is still used in my neighborhood, which was a integrated society, because mostly everyone in my neighborhood was in the military, so the fact that like people felt that, or these people who are supposed to have this duty of upholding beliefs and everything, believe that it's okay to segregate themselves from others by calling them a certain word that they know is a hateful word, especially when it comes from someone in a hateful way. And so, yeah, I was definitely upset when I got home And it was a situation where there were some other events that happened that led me to just leave the situation, leave the neighborhood in general. So